You tell several people you are looking to commit murder. Some take you seriously, others don't. Then you walk into a gun shop and are denied a weapon based on a background check. The system seems to be working. But a family member steps in and purchases that weapon for you. And weeks later, several people are dead. My name is M. William Phelps. I'm an investigative journalist and the true crime author of close to 50 books. I've dedicated the past 20 years of my life to helping families of the missing and murdered. Join me. We're crossing the line. Social work can be a thankless job, frustrating beyond belief. One of those civic services as a community we need to do better at. On all three sides of the equation, the family social worker service, the way in which families treat social workers, and most importantly, the bureaucrats mishandling mental health services. I think many might agree with me on this note. I've spoken to a lot of social workers throughout my career who feel overworked, that the town or state is not on their side, and that overall mental health care in this country needs an entire overhaul. 48-year-old Lara Soble is not only a devoted wife and mother, but that devotion extends to her job as a caseworker with the Department for Children and Families in Barre, Vermont, protecting vulnerable children on the front lines of potential abuse, among many other social issues. It's safe to say that Lara has seen the most horrific cases of child abuse imaginable working for the DCF. A state rep once told NBC5 in Vermont that he got a sense just from speaking to Lara that her entire life has been built around helping kids and being a good mom and being a good friend before calling her a remarkable woman. Friends, family, and just about anyone coming into contact with Lara would certainly agree. The woman is a rarity in that sense. Lara had that indomitable sense of experience being born in New York, coming of age in Long Island, and earning her master's and BA from the University of Vermont. What I mean is that she isn't a woman growing up in the town she works without what could be important worldly experience to fall back on and help her manage some perhaps tougher decisions she needs to make in a moment's notice. And I don't mean that someone growing up and living all their lives and working in Barre would not be as effective. I only mean for Lara and her personality, it gave her the edge that she needed to get through what is one of the more demanding jobs out in the world. Burnout among social workers is extreme. One study puts burnout within the framework of social work at about 40%, most of whom claim emotional exhaustion as the number one issue. Lara and her husband Timothy are celebrating 15 years of marriage in 2015 and happily raising 2 daughters. Their rabbi once said that Lara, especially, holds this deep warmth about her, carries with her a sense of justice wherever she goes, and has this burning commitment to make the world a better place. More than that, Lara treats people with dignity and respect, no matter who they are, which makes her an ideal social worker. One comment by her rabbi that struck me was how Lara mentors families, always wants to help first, and never judges. How many of us can say that about ourselves? With long flowing black hair, curly as pasta, big brown eyes, and an engaging smile, Lara would show up at a home and immediately get to work on helping the family manage any of the difficult stressors plaguing them. She sought remedies to problems, solutions, and mediation more than looking to take kids out of homes. It became about mending families, not breaking them up. Yet, on the other end of this is the fact that you are dealing with people at times in their most vulnerable and perhaps even most unstable part of their lives, either clinically or situationally. Their kids' lives and futures are at stake, along with an unspoken threat that those kids can be taken from them and out of the home in an instant, which can bring people to their knees and make them do things they otherwise would never dream of. On August 7th, 2015, a Friday afternoon, many workers inside City Place on Main Street in Barre City are getting antsy, including Lara. The day seems to be dragging, but it's close to 4:30 p.m. now, and the weekend is just about here. Most everyone is gathering their things and getting ready to leave work and head home. Lara is in the DCF office inside the building, saying goodbye to her coworkers and talking about the upcoming weekend and some much-needed rest. To be able to get away from the job, even for 48 hours, is sometimes enough to re-energize, decompress, and prepare for another week. At the same time Lara and a colleague are walking out of the building, a woman and her older son pull into the parking lot around the back of City Place, where a lot of people come out. The woman and her son are preparing to go in and start their shift on the maintenance crew. As they pull up and park, they notice a woman sitting in her vehicle directly in the adjacent parking space. She has her back to the driver's side door, her feet clung across the passenger seat. It's as if she is waiting for someone. Maybe her husband or a boyfriend works in the building and she's hanging out to give him a ride home. She also seems to have her eyes eerily locked onto the door in and out of the back of the building, where people are emerging, obviously looking for someone specifically. The woman and her son get out of their vehicle and start walking toward the building. As they pass the car with the woman inside, the maintenance worker drops her cell phone. After leaning down to pick it up, when she rights herself, she is nearly face to face with the woman sitting inside her car, who is now screaming as if arguing with someone. But there is no one else inside her car. Weird. It's definitely not a situation where she is talking to someone on her phone. On top of that, her hands are flailing around and she is heated and in a full-blown argument with, seemingly, herself. As they move on and head toward the building, the mother and son discuss how the woman inside the car, arguing with herself, seemed to have something beside her. As they enter the building, the woman stops to think for a minute, and it registers with her that what she saw inside the woman's car looked a hell of a lot like the butt end of a rifle, that long handle portion you'd kind of nudge into your shoulder if you were taking target practice or shooting skeet or hunting. As the maintenance worker and her son walk further into the building, they pass Lara Soble and one of her coworkers as they are heading out the same door. They smile and gesture a good night to one another, and both go their opposite ways. Within a few moments, as both parties are now out of one another's eyesight, the maintenance worker and her son turn quickly around after hearing what appears to be a loud crack, like a gun going off. It's so loud that it makes the woman's ears ring. Just then, they walk toward the door and see that same woman from inside the car, now outside of her vehicle, waving a rifle around, yelling and screaming. Lara Soble is on the ground, barely moving, but still alive, bleeding, hurt badly. Blood is beginning to pool around her. The woman with the gun then walks up to Lara, points the barrel directly at her as she lie on the ground, wounded and barely moving, and then she says something and then fires another round directly into Lara, this time surely killing her. As the second shot rings out, people begin running toward the scene, which is now chaotic, yet there is also this dark feeling of eeriness about what had just happened, as if all are seeing it take place, but not believing it's real. The woman with the gun is now waving it at people and screaming something about DCF taking her 8-year-old child away from her. 3 men surround the woman and are ready to take her down. This, mind you, as several people looking out their windows from above where all of this is going on pick up the phone and dial 911. This one, unfortunately, and quite sadly, doesn't end here. And the backstory leading up to this moment is even more deadly. Please subscribe to Crossing the Line wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review of the show, especially on Apple Podcasts. I'm doing this show independently now, free from any corporate or big podcasting media company involvement, which allows me to bring you more of the content you want to hear and have asked me for. This is completely our show. Reviews and subscriptions really help. You are my public relations and social media team now, and without your help, I could not do this. And that support, I must tell you, means everything. It's incredibly humbling. And I want to thank each one of you for listening. We can grow this show together, which will allow me to do even bigger things with it. If you go to crossingtheline.biz or mwilliamphelps.com, you can contact me there to suggest cases or just say hello. And look for me across all social media platforms at M. William Phelps. That's the @ symbol and my name, M. William Phelps. I'll be back in 1 minute. Barre City Police received that call and head right out to the scene on Main Street in Barre City. By now, everyone knows that it's Lara who has been shot. One of the kindest, warmest, pleasant people they all know, who has nothing but love and wanting a better life for children and their families, is on the ground, a pool of blood around her. Not far away from Lara, 3 men have overcome the wild woman with the rifle and are holding her down on the ground. The Vermont State Police arrive. In fact, the local state's attorney, Scott Williams, who was inside a nearby gym working out, is also on scene. It had been Williams, actually, who wrestled the gun out of the crazed woman's hands. Police put the woman inside a cruiser. They recover the weapon, a Remington 700 with .270 caliber rounds. Her name is Jody Herring. She is well known within DCF and has been acting out in a wild fashion of late, threatening people. Inside the PD, after she is uncuffed and searched, Jody reaches inside her belt buckle and pulls out a plastic, rectangular-shaped item and hands it to the officer. "You might want these," she says. "I don't need them anymore." The cop looks at what is a cartridge and then realizes it's a sleeve of .270 caliber bullets with only a few left, which is alarming considering she'd only shot 2 rounds back at City Place. There's a feeling now inside the room as Jody is being processed, while she is laughing, as if, "Oh my God, what else have you done?" Placing her inside a cell, Jody is still laughing and talking about Lara, insisting that what had just taken place is no big deal. Later that night, August 7th, 2015, Detective Sergeant Hal Hayden and Detective Sergeant Mike Potter bring Jody into an interview suite and sit her down. Think of a wild woman in prison scrubs from a horror film, shabby and dirty and laughing and flipping her head from side to side as if possessed by a demon. That would be close to the scene here. Of course, I am over-dramatizing it a bit, but you get the picture. Forced to sit, Jody becomes increasingly agitated. She mumbles things, and it appears that this interview is not going to go the way everyone had hoped it would. There is almost no chance Jody is going to get away with this crime. The forensics, witnesses, Jody standing over Lara, pulling the trigger as people look on, video of the entire murder from CCTV all over the place. It's over for this woman. She knows it. They know it. The only question now is mental illness and responsibility. "I'm done talking to you," Jody tells them both about 10 minutes into the conversation. And that is that. Then something horrific happens. Jody's brother walks into the station. He sits down. He begins talking about earlier that day, which is where a horrible tragedy turns into mass murder, compounding what is one of the more tragic days in the history of Barre City, Vermont. 40-year-old Jody Herring, a mother of three, grew up on a farm in Vermont and had a history of child custody issues by the time Lara takes over her case. Jody is thin, with long, straight, dirty blonde hair and, well, very bitter and aggressive, seemingly all the time. She has been under intense scrutiny by DCF of late, and Lara had been working with the family to get Jody and her kids back together, but it just wasn't happening. Jody is the victim of trauma, of course. It always seems to be there in these situations, which doesn't absolve blame, but it gives us a bit of understanding. I would argue that when we do get this knowledge of the progression that leads to these types of murders, we don't learn from it as a government. I guess that is a conversation for another time and place, but I don't think many would argue that our mental health care system is not working currently. Jody's father died when she was a very young child. His death was deemed a suicide, but Jody and others in her family have always maintained he was murdered. According to a Vermont State Supreme Court document, Jody claims her mother and then stepfather physically abused her. Jody's brother confirms that when he was 14 and Jody just 11, their mother kicked them out of the house and they were on their own. From there, Jody and her brother lived in abandoned cars and then later moved in with their grandparents. When Jody was 17, she was raped, which led to her becoming pregnant and having her first child. From there, Jody goes on to find herself in several physically and emotionally abusive relationships. Jody has several more children, becomes addicted to substances, and her parental rights are then terminated. This is the same script we see time and again. I've heard from social workers. This is the same story they hear from most of the women whose cases they wind up with. Men treating women horrifically and destroying their lives. I'm not making excuses here for Jody. I am just pointing out context and what is obvious. Sometimes we can see these crimes happen before they ever take place. Between 2014 and 2015, Jody is becoming increasingly harder to understand and incoherent most of the time. She's also homeless and also has one of her daughters with her. The school gets wind and contacts DCF, and Jody then loses custody of that child. This, according to her brother, as he sits with detectives, sent Jody over the edge. Jody began saying things all the time like, "I want to shoot people in the head. Brain, matter, splatter. People are going to pay. There's going to be Armageddon." Jody also had a hit list. She tried buying guns herself, but was routinely denied after a background check. So that part of the system actually worked. That May, Jody is hospitalized after overdosing on pills. When they found Jody unconscious in her bed, there were empty pill bottles around her and also pictures of her children. She is involuntarily committed, and she is combative at first and refuses treatment, but then learns the system, takes part, and is discharged that same month. The system there clearly not working. Then a family member buys Jody a rifle and gives it to her. Family members, Jody believes, are calling DCF on her. She hates these people for it. Only now, she is armed. "You better stop calling DCF on me," she screams into the voicemail of 2 family members, "or I am going to come and shoot your brains out." This is Jody's mother and grandmother she is talking about. They live in the house with Jody's aunt. Hours before Jody headed over to City Place to kill Lara, she went over to her mother's to pay them a visit. Leaving there, she got into her vehicle and headed to City Place, where she then killed Lara Soble. When Jody's cousin came home that day to the house where Jody's mother, aunt, and grandmother live, she walks in and finds Jody's mother and grandmother on the first floor, shot at basically point-blank range. Upstairs, Jody's aunt is also dead, killed the same way. Jody Herring had murdered 3 family members before she headed off to murder Lara Soble in front of several people. Those witnesses later say that when Jody pulled the rifle on Lara, she said, quote, "You know what you did." After putting the second round into Lara, Jody added, quote, "They didn't listen to me. It was my 9-year-old daughter. They got what they deserved." I'll be right back. I know I ask you this every week, but I just want to say something here. Since my Crossing the Line Presents limited series, 34 Fairview Road, has come out, we have been bad review bombed by people who don't want to face the truth in that case and who attack anyone who even questions that truth. So their leader has gone on to tell them to give the show bad reviews, 1-star reviews. And so that's what they did. I've inquired to Apple and other places about taking those reviews down because there are strict guidelines about that now, but it seems that it hasn't been done. So if you could, I'd appreciate a review of the show that reflects your opinion and your true feelings about what we're doing here. It would mean the world to me. It seems to always be obvious after the fact, doesn't it? Sandy Hook, Park City, that dude dressed as the Joker years ago and mowing down a bunch of people in an Aurora, Colorado movie theater. I could cite a dozen more. But afterward, after we get the facts, there's always this sort of, yep, you could see that coming. Which is perhaps the saddest, most upsetting aspect beyond all the lives lost when we focus on these cases, that for the most part, they could have and likely should have been prevented. Someone in Jody's family bought her a rifle after she was denied a legal one. I mean, what did that person expect to happen? First evaluated in 2015, Jody presented with symptoms of suspiciousness and persecution rising to the level of paranoid delusion and ideation. That belief about her father being murdered and then a later delusion that her oldest daughter and an ex-partner were following her were based in part in some truth the doctor assessing her determined. Quote, although based in reality, Jody's perception of these various wrongdoings were quite extreme, that same doctor went on to note. Another doctor working on behalf of Jody's defense team had this to say about the trauma Jody has suffered. I would never say that trauma causes something like the murders she committed. Which is important, I think. Bottom line here is that they all agreed Jody posed a great risk to society. Of course, this is a bit late, after she murdered 4 people. The families of her victims experienced devastating losses impacting the rest of their lives. DCF staff were asked to speak at Jody's sentencing after she pled out her case to murder. They said how difficult it has been for them, how scared they have become, and that they have been receiving threats in wake of Laura's murder. Imagine, threats to their lives after their colleague had been viciously murdered for doing her job and protecting children. Jody also spoke and said she wished she could take back what she did. She claims she handles her stress differently than anyone else. She can't help herself. I asked for help several times, she went on, and I didn't get it. She blamed the hospital she had been put in just before the murders for letting her discharge. Jody's appeal in 2019 was denied. She remains in prison for the remainder of her life, where she perhaps belongs. We could argue that she should be in a hospital receiving mental health treatment, but I don't know if that argument gets us anywhere. 4 people are dead. Jody is responsible. Lara Soble graced her work with compassion and kindness, her rabbi later says. Lara was once quoted in a news article while she was working for DCF, in which a client told the newspaper, "Lara would say to the families, 'We're not here to make your life hard. We are here to help.'" Lara's children had given a list of things they miss about their mother to the same rabbi. Among the 10 they jotted down are: her laughter and happiness was contagious, her compassion and how she always cared for others, an amazing and unique sense of humor. Her heart was filled with so much love and light. She had the best smile. That is the totality of what murder takes away from people. Things loved ones will never, ever forget. That's it for this week. I need your help. Please subscribe to Crossing the Line wherever you get your podcast. And don't forget, leave a review of the show, especially on Apple Podcasts. And log on to crossingtheline.biz or mwilliamphelps.com to contact me and suggest cases, or just say hi. And look for me across all social media platforms using the @ symbol and my name, M. William Phelps. Thank you for supporting this show. I am allowed to do it because of you, and that truly means more to me than I can say. Be safe, be aware. Sources for this episode include State of Vermont versus Jody Herring Supreme Court Appeal document, State of Vermont versus Jody Herring Criminal Division Attorney General indictments, August 2015, MontpelierBridge.org, In Memorial, Honoring Lara Soble, Tom Brown, August 21st, 2015, by Rabbi Shauna Margot. Crossing the Line is executive produced by M. William Phelps, LLC, and Matthew Valentinus, Mom's Basement Management. Written by me, M. William Phelps. Audio mastering and mixing by Matt Russell. Original music written and performed by Thomas Mooney, Tom Phelps, and Matt Russell.